Hello, YouTube world. Welcome to the Hustlers Corner. This is DJ Smooth, straight out of Johannesburg, South Africa. Click that like button as we continue with Chapter 8 of Steve Biko's I Write What I Like, the 40th edition, yeah? We would like for you to like, share, subscribe the video, let others know about the platform. It is a platform for hustlers, and it's a platform where we're pretty much smart hustlers. We're street smart, but we also we're book smart. So we're on chapter 8. Sorry guys, chapter 8. Yeah, South African cultural concepts. This is a paper given by Steve at a conference called IDAMASA, Interdenominational Association of African Ministers of Religion, and ASECA, the Association for the Educational and Cultural Development of the African People, at the Ecumenical Lay Training Center, Edendale, Natal, in 1971. The conference drew together a number of black organizations who might be interested in a closer association. Several papers were given, including one by Chief Gachabutelezi. This conference proved to be a staging post on the way to the formation of the Black People's Convention in Johannesburg in December of that year. South African cultural concepts. One of the most difficult things to do these days is to talk with authority on anything to do with African culture. Somehow, Africans are not expected to have any deep understanding of their own culture or even of themselves. Other people have become authorities on all aspects of the African life, or to be more accurate, on Bantu life. Thus, we have the thickest of volumes on some of the strangest subjects, even the feeding habits of the urban Africans. A publication by a fairly liberal group, Institute of Race Relations. In my opinion, it is not necessary to talk with Africans about African culture. However, in the light of the above statements, one realizes that there is so much confusion sown, not only amongst casual non-African readers, but even amongst Africans themselves, that perhaps a sincere attempt should be made to be emphasizing the authentic cultural aspects of the African people by Africans themselves. Since that unfortunate date, 1652, we have been experiencing a process of acculturation, I think, yeah. Guys, forgive me, I did Bantu education. I come from the 80s. So you'll forgive my pronunciation, but I guess you'll get the message. Shout out to my brother Nelson Makamo at the back. I worked with Nelson Makamo from back in 2006 when we did the cover of Wylands Volume 1. No, it wasn't Wylands Volume 1. I think Wylands Volume 1 Benchani later. I think it was what album was it? Oh, Sound Revival 1. Yeah, Sound Revival 1. He did the cover, Nelson Makamo. Shout out to Nelson Makamo, who's doing big things all over the world. I'm really proud of you, my brother. It's all love. I'm very, very proud of you. And you know, I continue to represent. You're all over my house. There you are at the back on a piece I bought from you, I think 5 or 6 years ago. I got it curated by Nti Ramabua. At the time, she was selling art. Now you can check her out. She's got a food page. I think she is chef. Yeah, she's chef_NTI, Chef Nti. She's doing some great work. I'm proud of you too, my sister. It's all black love. Okay, let's continue, guys. In our case, this fusion has been extremely one-sided. The two major cultures that met and fused were the African culture and the Anglo-Boer culture. Whereas the African culture was unsophisticated and simple, the Anglo-Boer culture had all the trappings of a colonialist culture and therefore was heavily equipped for conquest. Where they could, they conquered by persuasion using a highly exclusive religion that denounced all other gods and demanded a strict code of behavior with respect to clothing, education, ritual, and custom. Where it was possible to convert, firearms were readily available and used to advantage. Hence, the Anglo-Boer culture was the more powerful culture in almost all facets. This is where African began to lose a grip on himself and his surroundings. Thus, in taking a look at cultural aspects of the African people, one inevitably finds himself having to compare. This is primarily because of the contempt that the super culture shows towards the indigenous culture. To justify its exploitative basis, the Anglo-Boer culture has at all times been directed at bestowing an inferior status to all cultural aspects of the indigenous people. I am against the belief that African culture is time-bound. The notion that with the conquest of the African, all his culture was obliterated. I am also against the belief that when one talks of African culture, one is necessarily talking of the pre-Van Riebeck culture. Obviously, the African culture has had to sustain severe blows and may have been battered, nearly out of shape, by the belligerent cultures it collided with. Yet, in essence, even today, one can easily find the fundamental aspects of the pure African culture in the present-day African. Hence, in taking a look at African culture, I'm going to refer as well to what I have termed the modern African culture. One of the most fundamental aspects of our culture is the importance we attach to men. Ours has always been a man-centered society. Westerners have, in many occasions, been surprised at the capacity we have for talking to each other. Not for the sake of arriving at a particular conclusion, but merely to enjoy the communication for its own sake. Intimacy is a term not exclusive for particular friends, but applying to a whole group of people who find themselves together, either through work or through residential requirements. In fact, in the traditional African culture, there is no such thing as two friends. Conversation groups were more or less naturally determined by age and division of labor. Thus, one would find all boys whose job was to look after cattle periodically meeting at popular spots to engage in conversation about their cattle, girlfriends, parents, heroes, etc. All commonly shared their secrets, joys, and woes. No one felt unnecessarily an intruder into someone else's business. The curiosity manifested was welcome. It came out of a desire to share. This pattern one would find in all age groups. House visiting was always a feature of the elderly folks' way of life. Or house visiting was always a feature of the elderly folks' way of life. Sorry guys, I know my tongue is different. My pronunciation is probably different from anyone else's out there. But I hope I'm going to read the best way I can. I hope you can understand. As long as you comprehend the message, for me that's what matters. Never mind my pronunciation. No? Where were we? Oh, no one felt unnecessarily an intruder into someone else's business. The curiosity manifested was welcome. It came out of a desire to share. This pattern one would find in all age groups. House visiting was always a feature of elderly folks' way of life. No reason was needed or as a basis for visits. It was all part of our deep concern for each other. It was being neighborly, being African. These are things never done in the Westerners' culture. A visitor to someone's house, with the exception of friends, is always met with the question, what can I do for you? This attitude to see people not as themselves, but as agents for some particular function, either to one's disadvantage or advantage, is foreign to us. We are not a suspicious race. We believe in the inherent goodness of man. We enjoy man for himself. We regard our living together not as an unfortunate mishap warranting endless competition among us, but as a deliberate act of God to make us a community of brothers and sisters jointly involved in the quest for a composite answer to the varied problems of life. Hence, in all we do, we always place man first and hence all our action is usually joint, community-oriented action rather than individualism, which is the hallmark of the capitalist approach. We always refrain from using people as stepping stones. Instead, we are prepared to have a much slower progress in an effort to make sure that all of us are marching to the same tune. Nothing dramatizes the eagerness of the African community. Excuse me, guys. Nothing dramatizes the eagerness of the African to communicate with each other more than their love for song and rhythm. Music is the African culture, features in all emotional states. When we go to work, we share the burdens and pleasures of the work we are doing through music. This particular facet, strangely enough, has filtered through the present day. Tourists always watch with amazement the synchrony of music and action as Africans working at a roadside using their picks and shovels with well-timed precision to the accompaniment of a background song. Battle songs were a feature of the long march to war in the olden days. Girls and boys never played any games without using music and rhythm as its basis. In other words, with Africans, music and rhythm were not luxuries, but part and parcel of our way of communication. Any suffering we experienced was made much more real by song and rhythm. There is no doubt that the so-called Negro spirituals sung by black slaves in the States as they toiled under oppression were indicative of their African heritage. The major thing to note about our songs is that they never were songs for individuals. All African songs are group songs, though many have words. This is not the most important thing about them. Tunes were adapted to suit the occasion and had the wonderful effect of making everybody read the same things from the common experience. In war, the songs reassured those who were scared, highlighted the determination of the regiment to win a particular encounter, and made much more urgent to the need to settle the score in suffering, as in the case of black slaves. They derive sustenance out of a feeling of togetherness. At work, the binding rhythm makes everybody brush off the burden, and hence Africans can continue for hours on end because of this shaded energy. Attitudes of Africans to property again show just how individualistic the African is. As everybody here knows, African society had the village community as its basis. Africans always believe in having many villages with a controllable number of people in each, rather than the reverse. This obviously was a requirement to suit the needs of a community-based and man-centered based society. This obviously was a requirement to suit the needs of a community-based and man-centered society. Hence, most things were jointly owned by the group. For instance, there was no such thing as an individual land ownership. The land belonged to the people and was merely under the control of the local chief on behalf of the people. When cattle went to graze it was on an open field and not on anybody's specific farm. Farming and agriculture, though on individual family basis, had many characteristics of joint efforts. Each person could, by a simple request and holding of a special ceremony, invite neighbors to come and work on his plots. This service was returned in kind, and no remuneration was ever given. Poverty was a foreign concept. We were in abundance. This could only be really brought about to the entire community by an adverse climate during a particular season. It never was considered repugnant to ask one's neighbors for help if one was struggling. In almost all instances, there was help between individuals, tribe and tribe, chief and chief, etc., in spite of war. Another important aspect of the African culture is our mental attitude to problems, presented by life in general. Whereas the Westerner is geared to use a problem-solving approach following very trenchant analysis, our approach is that of situation experiencing. I will quote from Dr. Kaunda to illustrate this point. The Westerner, open quote, the Westerner has an aggressive mentality. When he sees a problem, he will not rest until he has formulated some solution to it. He cannot live with a contradictory ideas in his mind. He must settle for one or the other, or else evolve a third idea in his mind, which harmonizes or reconciles the other two. And he is vigorously scientific in rejecting solutions for which there is no basis in logic. He draws a sharp line between the natural and supernatural, the rational and non-rational. And more often than not, he dismisses the supernatural and non-rational as superstition. Africans, being a pre-scientific people, do not recognize any conceptual cleavage between the natural and supernatural. They experience a situation rather than face a problem. By this, I mean they allow both rational and non-rational elements to make an impact upon them. And any action they may take could be described more as a response of the total personality to the situation than the result of some mental exercise. Close quote. This I find a most apt analysis of the essential difference in the approach to life of these two groups. We as a community are prepared to accept that nature will have its enigmas, which are beyond our powers to solve. Many people have interpreted this attitude as lack of initiative and drive, yet in spite of my belief in the strong need for scientific experimentation, I cannot help feeling that more time also should be spent in teaching men and men to live together, and that perhaps the African personality, with its attitude of laying less stress on power and more stress on men, is well on the way to solving our confrontation problems. All people are agreed that Africans are deeply religious race. All people are agreed that Africans are a deeply religious race. In the various forms of worship than one found throughout the southern part of our continent, there was at least a common basis. We all accepted without any doubt the existence of a God. We had our own community of saints. We believed, and this was consistent with our views of life, that all people who died had a special place next to God. We felt that a communication with God could only be through these people. We never knew anything about hell. We do not believe that God created people only to punish them eternally after a short period on earth. Another aspect of our religious practices was the occasion of worship. Again, we did not believe that religion could be featured as a separate part of our existence on earth. It was manifest in our daily lives. We thanked God through our ancestors before we drank beer, married, worked, etc. We obviously find it artificial to create special occasions for worship. Neither did we see it logical to have a particular building in which all worship would be conducted. We believed that God was always in communication with us, and therefore merited attention everywhere, anytime, anywhere. It was the missionaries who confused our people with their new religion. By some strange logic, they argued that theirs was a scientific religion and ours was a mere superstition, in spite of the biological discrepancies. So obvious. It was the missionaries who confused our people with their new religion. By some strange logic, they argued that theirs was a scientific religion and ours was a mere superstition, in spite of the biological discrepancies so obvious in the basis of their religion. They further went on to preach a theology of the existence of hell, scaring our fathers and hey, Steve Biko. Sorry, guys. They further went on to preach a theology of the existence of hell, scaring our fathers and mothers with stories about burning in eternal flames. So, Rakan. Yo, Steve Biko, yo, guys, yo, yeah, ne? They further went on to preach a theology of the existence of hell, scaring our fathers and mothers with stories about burning in eternal flames and gnashing. Sorry, guys, I don't know how the word G-N-A, you say gnashing or gnashing, and I don't know what it means, but I'll pick up from the sentence. I'll make out what it's the context. I'll start the sentence from the beginning. I apologize. They further went on to preach a theology of the existence of hell, scaring our fathers and mothers with stories about burning in eternal flames and gnashing of teeth and grinding of bone. This cold, cruel religion was strange to us, but our forefathers were sufficiently scared of the unknown impending anger to believe that it was worth a try. Down went our cultural values. Steve Biko, yeah, ne? All right, we continue, ne? Chapter 8. Yes, it is difficult to kill the African heritage. There remains, in spite of the superficial cultural similarities between the detribalized and the Westerner, a number of cultural characteristics that mark out the detribalized as an African. I am not here making a case for separation on the basis of cultural differences. I am sufficiently proud to believe that under a normal situation, Africans can comfort. I am sufficiently proud to believe that under a normal situation, Africans can comfortably stay with people of other cultures and be able to contribute to their joint cultures of the communities they have joined. However, what I want to illustrate here is that even in a pluralistic society like ours, there are still some cultural traits that we can boast of which have been able to withstand the process of deliberate bastardization. These are aspects of the modern African culture, a culture that has used concept from the white world to expand on inherent cultural characteristics. Thus, we see that in the area of music, the African still expresses himself with conviction. The craze about jazz arises out of the craze about jazz arises out of a conversion by the African artist of mere notes to meaningful music, expressive of real feelings. The monkey jive, soul, etc. are all aspects of a modern type African culture that expresses the same original feelings. Solos like those of Pat Boone and Elvis Presley could never really find expression within the African culture, because it is not in us to listen passively to pure musical notes. Yet when soul struck with all engulfing rhythm, it immediately caught on. Yet when soul struck with its all-engulfing rhythm, it immediately caught on and set hundreds of millions of black bodies in gyration throughout the world. These were people reading in soul the real meaning, the defined message, said loud, I am black and I am proud. This is fast becoming our modern culture, a culture of defiance, self-assertion, and group pride and solidarity. This is a culture that emanates from a situation of common experience of oppression. Just as it now finds expression in our music and our dress, it will spread in other aspects. This is the new and modern black culture to which we have given a major contribution. This is the modern culture that is responsible for the restoration of our faith in ourselves and therefore offers a hope in the direction we are taking from here. Thus, in its entirety, the African culture spells out as people particularly close to nature. As Kaunda puts it, our people may be unlettered and physical horizons may be limited, yet they inhabit a larger world than the sophisticated Westerner, who has magnified his physical senses through inverted gadgets at the price all too often of cutting out the dimension of the spiritual. This close proximity to nature enables us, This close proximity to nature enables the emotional component in us to be so much richer in that it makes it possible for us, without any apparent difficulty, to feel for people and to easily identify with them in any emotional situation arising out of suffering. The advent of the Western culture has changed our outlook almost drastically. No more could we run our own affairs. We were required to fit in as people tolerated with great restraint in a Western-type society. We were tolerated simply because our cheap labor is needed. Hence, we are judged in terms of standard. Hence, we are judged in terms of standards we are not responsible for. Whenever colonization sets in with its dominant culture, it devours the native culture and leaves behind a bastardized culture that can only thrive at the rate and pace allowed it by the dominant culture. This is what has happened to the African culture. It is called a subculture purely because the African people in the urban complexes are mimicking the white man rather unashamedly. It is called a subculture purely because the African people in the urban complexes are mimicking the white man rather unashamedly. In rejecting Western values, therefore, we are rejecting those things that are not only foreign to us, but that seek to destroy the most cherished of our beliefs. That the cornerstone of society is man himself, not just his welfare, not his material well-being, but just man himself, with all his ramifications. We reject the power-based society of the Westerner that seems to be ever concerned with perfecting their technological know-how, while losing out on their spiritual dimension. We believe that in the long run, the special contribution to the world by Africa will be in this field of human relationship. The great powers of the world may have done wonders in giving the world an industrial and military look, but the great gift still has to come from Africa, giving the world a human. The great powers of the world may have done wonders in giving the world an industrial and military look, but the great gift still has to come from Africa, giving the world a more human face. That was chapter 8. Thank you very much for tuning in. We're coming back with chapter 7 on the next video. Like, share, subscribe, let your friends know about the Hustlers Corner. Thank you very much, guys. Steve Biko. I write what I like, the 40th edition.